There are places where water moves without sound, where a river widens, slows, and forgets its own direction. In such places, men who work the current often speak less, listening instead for what should not be there. In the late summer of 1876, along a long-traveled but poorly recorded stretch of the lower Mississippi tributaries, a small trading vessel made its usual passage southward. The river's name varies in surviving accounts, some listed as a secondary channel near the Yazoo Basin, others as an unnamed offshoot marked only by cypress stands and mud banks, but all agree on the conditions. Heat without wind, water thick with silt, and nights that pressed close. The boat itself was unremarkable. A shallow draft trading skiff, 32 feet in length, carrying barrels of salt pork, lamp oil, dry goods, and mail. It was owned cooperatively by 3 river tradesmen whose names appear in fragments across ledger books, shipping manifests, and a single personal journal now held in a county archive. They were not explorers. They were not naturalists. They made their living moving goods between settlements that rarely appeared on formal maps. Their days followed a routine shaped by habit and caution. They rose before sunrise, checked lines and cargo, and pushed off while the water still held the nights cool. Progress was slow but predictable. Sandbars shifted, logs drifted, insects gathered thick along the banks. Nothing about the route was considered dangerous, only tedious. By all accounts, the first 4 days of travel were uneventful. Meals were taken quietly. Conversation was limited to distances, fuel, and the timing of stops. One man kept the journal not for publication, but to track expenses, weather, and hours underway. His entries from those days are brief. Temperatures noted. Water levels were marked upon. No complaints. But on the evening of the 5th day, something small intruded. They had tied up near a bend where the river widened unnaturally, its surface dark and smooth despite the current feeding into it. Cypress knees broke the waterline like knuckles. Frogs were present, but few birds. One trader later recalled that the air felt held, as if waiting, after sunset, while the men prepared to sleep aboard rather than make camp. One of them remarked on the water's movement. Not the current, but the surface. It was not rippling as it should. According to the journal, the water near the hole rose and fell in a slow, uneven rhythm. Not waves, not wake. A gentle lifting, then settling. The entry notes an attempt to reproduce the effect by shifting weight on deck. The movement did not change. At the time, no alarm was raised. Rivers do strange things at night. Temperature shifts. Submerged logs releasing trapped air. Silt settling. Still, the journal records a final line before the entry ends. Water closed tonight. Acts queer. No one suggested leaving. The lines were secure. The night was clear. And by the standards of men who lived on rivers, nothing yet had crossed the boundary from odd to concerning. But sleep, according to later recollections, came unevenly. More than one of them would later say that the boat felt less anchored than usual, as if the water beneath it was not entirely still even, when the river itself appeared to be. By morning, the surface had returned to normal, and so they continued on. Morning brought no immediate confirmation that the previous night had been anything more than fatigue and imagination. The river resumed its familiar behavior. The surface carried small ripples from passing debris. The current pulled steadily at the rudder. Sunlight broke through the cypress canopy in narrow, shifting bands. By all outward measures, the strange stillness of the night before had passed without consequence. The men ate sparingly and pushed off before the heat became oppressive. For several hours, nothing unusual occurred. The journal records steady progress and a brief delay caused by a partially submerged log. One trader remarked on fish movement near the port sidler, shapes passing just beneath the surface, which was not uncommon in that region. Catfish and paddlefish were known to reach impressive sizes, and the river supported them in abundance. It was shortly after midday, when the sun stood high and the air grew heavy, that the first unmistakable disturbance occurred. The vessel had slowed near another wide bend, where the current slackened. One man leaned over the side to rinse his hands when he noticed the water immediately below him dip inward, as if drawn downward by a gentle force. The motion was slight, no more than a few inches, but it was localized, confined to the area beside the hull. He called the others to look. What they observed did not resemble a whirlpool. There was no spinning, no outward pull. Instead, the surface appeared to sink, pause, and then rise again, slowly, unevenly. The motion repeated itself once, then again, each cycle lasting several seconds. The journal entry from that afternoon grows longer and less precise. The writer struggles to describe the movement, comparing it first to the settling of wet earth, then dismissing that explanation. He notes that the riverbed in that stretch was deep and soft, unlikely to collapse so rhythmically. The men attempted practical tests. They pushed the boat away from the bank. The movement followed them. They shifted cargo. The pattern did not change. One trader used a pole to probe the water below. He reported no resistance beyond the usual drag of silt and current. No submerged object could be located. For a time, they spoke openly about causes. Trapped gases were mentioned. Decomposing vegetation. Temperature differentials between surface and depth. The third night passed without incident, but not without tension. The lamp burned low and steady, casting a narrow ring of light across the deck and onto the water beside the hull. Insects gathered at its edge. The river moved on, dark and patient. No unusual motion appeared, yet none of the men slept deeply. Each waking sound, the creak of wood, the brush of water against the side, was noted, measured, and remembered. By morning, fatigue had settled in. The journal records shorter entries now, written with less care. Words trail off. Handwriting grows uneven. The writer notes a mild headache and a sense of pressure behind the eyes, which he attributes to the heat and poor rest. They continued south. As the day progressed, the river narrowed, then widened again into a broad, slow-moving stretch bordered by reeds and low mudbanks. The water here was darker than before, reflecting little of the sky. It was in this section, shortly before dusk, that the disturbance returned, this time without warning. One of the traders noticed it first, by sound. A faint slapping, irregular and wet, coming from beneath the stern. Not the rhythmic tap of water against wood, but something slower, heavier. When they stopped the boat and listened, the sound persisted. Then the surface near the rear of the vessel began to move. It did not sink all at once. Instead, sections of water seemed to rise and fall independently, as though the river were working in uneven pulses. The motion spread along the side of the boat, stopping just short of the bow. The men watched in silence as the water lifted, settled, and lifted again. This time, the cycles were closer together. The journal describes the sensation aboard the vessel as rocking, but not drifting. The lines remained taut. The current did not increase, yet the boat responded as if something below it were shifting weight. One trader suggested grounding, that perhaps they had drifted over a shallow bar. A pole was lowered again. It found depth. The riverbed lay several feet below, soft and undisturbed. Another man remarked that the water appeared thicker than usual, clinging briefly to the hull before sliding away. He wiped his hand along the side and noted the residue left behind. Nothing visible, only the familiar grit of silt. The men attempted to move away. As the boat edged forward, the motion followed once more, keeping pace for several yards before gradually diminishing. When it stopped, It did so unevenly, one side calming before the other, like a body settling after exertion. No one spoke for some time. When they did, the conversation was subdued. The earlier explanations were repeated, but without conviction. Gas pockets did not move with the vessel. Fish did not displace water in such a manner without breaking the surface. The idea of multiple causes occurring together was raised, then abandoned. That night, they did not tie up near the bank. Instead, they anchored in midstream, where the current was stronger and the water more predictable. The lamp was kept lit again, brighter this time. Watches were set, though no one said why. The journal entry for that evening ends abruptly, mid-sentence. Below it, written later in a different hand, is a single line. River not acting right. We will be glad to leave the stretch. But the river had not yet finished with them. And what had begun as an ordered easy to dismiss in daylight was now a pattern, one that followed them. The fourth night is the one most often referenced in later accounts. It is also the night described with the greatest restraint. They had anchored shortly before full dark, choosing a section of river where the banks pulled away and the current resumed a steady pool. The air was cooler than previous evenings, carrying a faint mist that hovered just above the waterline. Frogs had gone silent. Insects thinned as the lamp burned. One man stood watch near the bow. Another remained seated by the cargo. Half awake, the journal keeper lay below deck, listening. It began without movement, no ripples, no sound. Then, gradually, the boat lowered, not drifting, lowering, as if the water beneath it were gently withdrawing. The lines slackened slightly. The hull creaked, adjusting to a change none of the men could see. The surface beside the boat followed. According to the account later written, the water sank inward along both sides of the hull, forming shallow, uneven depressions that rose and fell slowly, out of time with one another. The motion was not violent. It was measured, repeated. Someone whispered that the river was drawing breath. The phrase appears nowhere in the journal itself, but it surfaces repeatedly in oral retellings recorded years later. Whether it was spoken aloud in that moment or assigned afterward is unclear. What is consistent is the description of the timing. The rise and fall occurred every few seconds, long enough to notice, too slow to ignore. Each lift brought the water higher against the hull, wetting planks that had remained dry all day. Each settling left the boat hanging, unsupported for a brief instant, before the river returned. The men attempted to pull anchor. As they did, the movement intensified. The journal describes a sensation of pressure beneath the deck, not upward force, but resistance, as if the water wished us to stay where we were. The wording is careful, almost apologetic, as though the writer feared exaggeration. The lamp flickered. Shadows distorted across the water's surface. One trader leaned over the side and immediately pulled back, reporting that the water felt warmer than expected, though the night air had cooled. No shape broke the surface. No object could be seen beneath it. Yet the breathing motion, there is no other term the accounts return to, continued. After several minutes, one man began shouting, not in panic, but in command, urging the others to keep hauling. The anchor came free with difficulty. As the boat moved, the water followed for a short distance, maintaining its rhythm before slowly releasing them. When the motion finally stopped, it did not end all at once. The stern steadied first, then the sides, the bow last. The river returned to its normal flow, carrying the vessel forward, as though nothing had occurred. No one slept afterward. The journal entry from that night is the longest in the record, yet it contains no conclusions. It ends with a single, deliberate sentence, underlined twice. Whatever caused it, it was not the current. By dawn, all three men agreed on one thing. They would not stop again until they reached a settled port, and they would not speak of the night while still on the water, because none of them could say then or later whether the river had finished what it had begun. They reached a small river settlement shortly after noon the following day. It was little more than a supply lending to storehouses, a narrow dock, and a cluster of homes set back from the bank. Smoke rose from cook fires. A bell rang once from the general store, marking the hour. Ordinary sounds returned, and with them, a sense of distance from the stretch of river they had left behind. The men secured the vessel and unloaded their cargo in silence. According to a later statement given by one of the traders, all three noticed the same thing once the boat was tied off. The water along the dock behaved as expected. It lapped gently at the posts. It carried debris downstream. There was no rise or fall beyond the tide of passing traffic. This observation was noted aloud. No one seemed relieved by it. They remained in the settlement longer than planned. One man claimed illness and stayed ashore. Another insisted on checking the hull for damage, though none was found. The journal records time spent sitting on the dock, watching the water without speaking. When asked by a local storekeeper if they had trouble upriver, the reply was carefully measured. They mentioned difficult currents, shifting channels. Nothing more. That restraint appears deliberate. The journal keeper later wrote that discussing the event felt unsafe, though he did not explain why. He noted an urge to downplay the experience, even to himself, and expressed concern that putting too much detail to paper might fix it too firmly in memory. Nevertheless, he wrote, the entries from those days are not descriptive so much as reflective. He questions whether exhaustion or heat could have influenced their senses. He lists known river phenomena that might account for what they saw, then crosses them out one by one, not dramatically, but methodically. He also notes changes in behavior. One trader refused to sleep aboard the vessel while it remained tied to the dock. Another woke abruptly during the night, convinced the boat was moving when it was not. The men avoided discussing the water after dark. Within 2 days, they sold part of their cargo and made arrangements to continue separately. The partnership, which had lasted several seasons, ended without argument. No reason is given in the surviving records. Each man left with his share and a private understanding that the journey south had concluded something. Before parting, the journal keeper made one final entry related to the incident. It is brief, written smaller than the rest, as though meant to be overlooked. River does not forget where it has held you. After that, the journal returns to ordinary matters, prices, distances, weather. The tone never quite recovers its earlier ease, but no further disturbances are described. What the men carried with them from that stretch of water did not take the form of injury or loss. It took the form of vigilance. They listened more carefully to rivers after that. They avoided certain bends. They trusted familiar currents less than before. And though none of them would publicly claim that the water had been alive, all three acted, from that point on, as if it could remember. The incident did not travel far beyond those who experienced it. There were no headlines, no official inquiry, no formal report submitted to any river authority. What remains exists only in fragments, ledger notes, a private journal, and a handful of second-hand recollections gathered decades later by local historians, who were never certain what they were being told. The journal itself ends less than a year after the journey. The final pages show no dramatic shift, only a gradual thinning of entries. Distances go unrecorded. Weather is noted vaguely. Eventually, the writing stops altogether. There is no explanation for its abandonment, only the absence of continuation. Of the three traders, one appears in census records several years later, listed as a laborer inland, far from navigable water. Another continued river work, but confines himself to short, well-charted routes. The third disappears from documentation entirely, his name appearing only once more in a shipping manifest, then nowhere again. No written account ever attempts to name what happened beneath their boat. Later interpretations vary. Some suggest rare geological activity, subsurface gas releases, interacting with slow-moving water. Others point to known, but poorly understood hydrodynamic effects in silt-heavy rivers, where pressure differentials can produce unusual surface behavior. These explanations remain speculative, offered without direct evidence tied to that specific stretch of river. Local oral accounts, recorded in the early 20th century, are more restrained than might be expected. They do not speak of creatures or omens. Instead, they mention places where the water holds still too long, or where boats should not linger after dark. The trader's story is sometimes referenced obliquely, without names, as an example rather than an event. What is most notable is what is missing. No one claims the phenomenon ever returned in the same way. No other journal describes water behaving with such rhythm, such persistence, beneath a stationary vessel. And yet, no one who knew the river well dismissed the account outright. There is no concluding reflection. The river itself continues to move through that region, its course altered by time, flood, and human intervention. The bend described in the journal has shifted. The banks have collapsed and reformed. The water no longer behaves exactly as it did in 1876. But rivers remember in ways records do not. And for a brief span of nights, according to those who were there, the water did something it should not have done quietly, repeatedly, and without leaving behind anything that could be proven. Only something that was felt, and then never spoken of again.